Trump is an ass.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the best way to open.
I think we caught that on the start.
That's not.
Great start to a video. I don't know how much we caught of that, but
Yeah, let's
that's...
hope not much.
I don't think Dave minds, to be fair.
I don't care.
Yeah.
So, hello and welcome to Bearded Heretics YouTube. I'm Luke, I'm Bearded Heretic, and today I have with me Philip and Dave. I don't do it in the same way as Joe. Do things differently.
How dare you?
I know.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, this is easier.
Yeah,
you don't
we
have
don't
to
have
sort
to
of
say
guess.
fuck all.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're live. Nerdy Rodent, welcome. And Chesh, hello. Yeah, we're live. This is my first live group show, so please bear with me if there's any technical hitches. I'm supposing that you can hear everyone, so if you can't, then please do let me know. Oh, and the chat box is actually working, which is great as well. So I didn't realize that it was going to work. So it didn't work yesterday. So how are you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
I'm very well. I'm excited to be here and talk about why religion is definitely a mental illness.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
because we know you have that view. Just
yeah,
like
of course.
as I said yesterday.
Yeah, as you said yesterday, yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. I do fully believe that religion is a mental illness. In fact, yeah.
And you believe the rocks
That's
are
correct.
atheists.
Yeah, that too. That, of course. Yeah. I mean, what else would they be, Luke? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
So I guess that's what we're going to be discussing today. Religion is a mental illness. I'm going to move the chat box slightly just because it's not actually getting seen behind Dave.
I'm fine. I take up all the space.
We're going to look at some stuff. We're not just going to talk about stuff. We are going to have a look at there's three things I want to show you. But I guess just to start, this is off the back of a big Twitter argument that I had with lots of people, where loads of people were saying it's a delusion, it's this and that, and I guess the tweet that I wrote was people who don't understand mental illness need to stop saying that religion is a mental illness. That was the tweet that I wrote, and I think that that's true, and it's really interesting because I think the atheist community prides itself on being superior intellectually, yet when they have
I do.
yeah, when they have somebody who's qualified in this area, which I am, I have a master's degree, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I've worked in the field for 5 years.
Yeah, but you haven't taken a picture of that to prove that. Yeah, so I mean that's.
I'm not. Look, there you go. There's two. Two for the price of one.
Off the internet.
Yeah, they're too pixelated to see the writing.
Yeah, that's definitely photoshopped or something.
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing, right? Like, why if somebody's saying something that they're knowledgeable in, why is the first response to go to, well, you're obviously not actually qualified. Prove you're qualified rather than prove what you're saying is true.
A bad understanding of skepticism.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So, what are your guys' initial thoughts on that argument and stuff? Because obviously I was buried deep within it, but what are your thoughts on what was said and yeah, your understanding of stuff?
Do you want to go first, Philip?
Oh yeah. So I admittedly don't have a huge expertise in psychology, right? But usually when I don't have an expertise in the field, I tend to, unless I inform myself on the issue, I tend to trust, sort of the expert scientific consensus on a topic. I think that's a good guideline for a thing, and I think that the consensus seems to be, from my understanding at least, that religion is not a mental illness. So, although I haven't looked much into it, I just take that to be the case, and I haven't seen any good arguments, at least that I have found, against this sort of view, and it seems very polarizing and very sort of ideology fueled as well, which is sort of another indication to me that I tend to distrust these sorts of arguments in general. So that's what I think about it. I guess. Yeah, I don't have much else. Yeah, maybe the other thing that I also always tend to think of sort of mental illness as something that is causing some sort of distress to the person. At least that's sort of my intuitive understanding. It might be sort of not technical, but the way I picture it, at least, it's causing some sort of distress to the person that is affected by it. And I don't see that happening with religion. I don't think that necessarily has to be the case, although it does happen to some people, I guess, but not to everyone. So I don't see why that would be the case. So that adds on top of everything else that I said as to why I don't think that religion is a mental illness.
I think that's a great answer. And Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, my minor in my undergrad was in psychology, so I know a tiny little amount. And I know that the way that most atheists describe the word deluded doesn't actually fit with the actual belief in God or religion. Yes, there can be religious people that are deluded, but there can be atheists that are deluded as well. The argument that religion is a mental illness comes from a kind of bigotry and a kind of outgroup stigmatization, and this need to make it feel like religion can only harm. But yeah, no, if you're going to show that religion is a mental illness and that religious people are deluded, you're going to have to prove that God doesn't exist. Not just argue that it's not rational to believe in him, but show that God doesn't exist.
And I think that was actually a real sticking point that I got into with people. And then people were saying I was like a theist because I was saying, like, for you to say, because part of, and we'll get into the definition of delusion a bit later on, but part of their definition is that it doesn't correspond with reality. Their thoughts don't correspond with reality, right? And so I just want to say hi, Brina. Nice to see you here again.
Hey, Brina.
Hey, Brina.
And in order for you to know that something doesn't correspond in reality, you have to know that thing doesn't exist. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Dave, about that point, because if you cannot prove that God doesn't exist, then you cannot prove that their version of events does not match reality. Yeah. And most atheists kind of sit back and go, "Oh, I don't need to prove a negative," which is a whole different topic. One that I will not get into today. I guess what I think would be really good to start with, though, is maybe, and this is where you guys I think would actually be massively much better than me, is what are some rational reasons to believe a God exists? What are some like really good reasons to believe a God exists?
Do you want to go on that first?
Well, this one's kind of hard. Because what might be rational for one person might not be rational for another. But I think religious experience is a good reason for an individual. It might not convince somebody else, but if they have a religious experience, there's no denying that experience internally. You might be able to say, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. But for that person, no, that's a religious experience. So that might give them a good rational cause to believe that they've had this experience and that a God exists.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, there's a whole lot on the sort of philosophical side as well. I think some of this is pretty good. Although I, of course, don't think that it's enough sort of cosmological arguments and stuff.
Well, seeing the world as if it looks like it's designed is also
that's another
rational.
yeah. It was I think much more powerful before Darwin, but it still holds some weight. I don't think it's nearly enough, but it still holds some weight to some people. Maybe not about sort of like the design of life itself, but more like sort of on a cosmological level, like the existence of life itself might be a better way to put it, rather than the details about how life forms are, where I think evolution has a pretty dominant and much more probable at this point explanation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean there are certain things that can lead you to believe in a god.
I think additionally to what you guys have said, there's an element of if you grow up in a religious community and you're taught this is the way the world works from a young age, and your community will agree with that, and there's no real kind of There's no one really kind of like saying anything otherwise. There might be some people in the community that have slightly differing beliefs, but generally speaking, everyone's on board with you, and society's on board with you, which we see in America a lot. Even in the UK, no one's going like, God, like society in general does not deny God's existence, right? You know, it's not a discussion about whether it's real or not in society, generally speaking. If someone believes in God, then it's kind of like, well, okay, you've learned that as you've grown up and stuff. So for me, like, if you've learned it, that's a rational reason to believe in God. For me, like, absolutely, perfectly rational.
Oh yeah, I do
Especially
think
if you've
that.
not come across something that convinces you
Yeah,
otherwise.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And especially with like modern interpretations of God, which are less literal, like less like we're thinking like away from young Earth creationists here, more like CAV Protestantism. You got
Yeah.
quite a liberal approach to what God's role in the forming of the universe and stuff is, in terms of like he formed it and led things along, like generated evolution, started that process, etc. You know, people, and I do think that's a God of the gaps argument in my opinion, but that's how people are making sense of God today. And they're not necessarily like kind of like being entirely aware that that's what they're doing. It's just that, you know, well, of course God created the universe. That's what they got taught, and then the world fits into that belief.
Yeah. I think, you know, for most of us, the things that we believe are the ones that we were taught, right? We don't question these sorts of things. Maybe you could make an argument that we should question these things, and I certainly think that for some of these things, it's true. But I do think that like a lot of people hold to what they believe today because they were taught that that's the case,
Yeah.
right? Like from moral views to political views to sort of scientific views, even, you know, what you have learned in school is what you keep, because until you have reason to reject it, at least it seems to be sort of a natural flow.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't question it. So because it's that way, as you argued, for most people, at least for some people, sorry, for sort of religion as well, I think, you know, that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, you know, that was the first thing I really wanted to do, was establish that there are rational, normal, everyday reasons for people to believe in God, right? And now we can start talking about, and there's some things in the comments, there's a couple of points that have been made that I actually want to get onto later, so I'm going to hold fire on those comments. They're very good, but I want to talk about that stuff a bit later on, especially from Chesh. Chesh has the points if you want a spoiler alert. And hi Rev, nice to see you here. So I'm going to bring some stuff up on the screen, so I'm just going to put us in be right back mode, which is a mode I stole from Joe, but not exactly the same. And then I will we'll come back in a moment.
We'll see if you're quicker than Joe.
I won't be quicker than Joe. I'll be much slower than Joe. Go get a cup of tea.
I'm timing it.
Yeah, I'm timing it too.
There we go.
Throw your uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back.
Like that.
I'm still muted though, of course. I thought I'd unmuted, but I hadn't. Okay, cool. So we now have on the screen. There's going to be a few links that we're going to look at. I think the first important one is to look at actually what a definition of a mental illness or disorder is. What's just happened? There was like a sound, like someone leaving or something.
No, I think it's how
didn't hear it.
that sound is when someone joins the stream
Oh,
that you have put up. Not on YouTube, but joins the stream on
someone
Discord
joined
to
us on
view.
Discord?
No. If for example me or Dave connect to watch your screen, that's the sound that sort of notifies you of
Oh,
that. Yeah.
that's so weird.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now I know what
Yeah.
that is. Man, I feel like an old man, you know. So you were right, Philip, about your thoughts on the DSM. So the DSM has 5 points basically that it kind of thinks of when it's considering a mental health disorder, but these aren't exclusive. This isn't like an exhaustive list. Okay. So a behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual. A syndrome is like a collection of symptoms. Yeah. Reflects an underlying psychobiological dysfunction, the consequences of which are clinically significant distress. There you go, Philip. E.g., a painful symptom or a disability, impairment in one or more important areas of functioning. So when we're thinking about something like, I don't know, like bipolar disorder, it might not cause that person distress when they're in a manic phase, but it could cause like a disability because they're not able to operate in society in a functional way. Yeah, they might spend all their money, or they might have they might be sexually disinhibited and take unnecessary sexual risks and stuff, and that can be seen as a disability. Must not be merely an expected response to common stresses and losses, for example, the loss of a loved one, or a culturally sanctioned response to a particular event, for example, trance states and religious rituals. So automatically, religion is cut out. But I had a few
excluded,
people, yeah, I had a few people saying that they excluded it for political reasons. And then when I asked for evidence
so
for that,
it's
they
a
blocked me.
conspiracy.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
I've
It's
seen
conspiracy,
that, yeah.
right? That's a conspiracy. Yeah, it's not excluded for political reasons. The reason that's excluded is because they have other psychological evidence that shows that that's not anything to do with mental illness. So, for instance, like, sorry, go on, Dave.
I was going to say, it's just sort of like getting caught up at a rock concert.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or being on stage hypnotized. So you know, when people like speaking in tongues, there's some theories that that's around like, because people are expected to do it as part of their religion, they want to kind of show that they're connected to God. And this may be on a subconscious level, like this may not be something they're aware of entirely, but they want to demonstrate to other people that they're connected to God, so they will then act in that way to kind of not embarrass the minister and not embarrass themselves and show that they're connected. So there's lots of reasons that happens. Mental illness is not one of them. Mental illness is not one of them, but somebody with mental illness could act in that way as well.
Yeah.
And this is the difference I really want to clear up today, is like the difference between what mental illness is in religion and why it isn't. And then primarily a result of social deviance or conflicts with society. And that's not like someone being antisocial. That's like somebody struggling to engage or become part of social society. So that's the DSM-5 definition. Yeah, that's the most up-to-date definition. And if we're thinking about the distress element, you're absolutely right, Philip. Most people who have a relationship with God, especially in the UK, don't have distress from that relationship or a disability.
Yeah, actually, you could argue the opposite. I think, at least for some people.
And there's a lot of atheists that argue that prayer is kind of like meditation. So they're actually arguing against their own point that it causes distress by believing in God. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it. I think it does act like a form of meditation. I think that it is just, that's exactly what it is, and there are some people I know who have converted from, or deconverted from Christianity to atheism and still pray because they find it a helpful tool to be able to like identify what they're worried about, identify what they could do about it, ask for help not necessarily thinking there's going to be a response, but just being able to do that. So it is one of those things that it is useful in a way. Yeah. So the second, sorry, go on, Philip. I saw you were about to talk.
No. Yeah, I just want to, it's interesting that like the fifth point is explicitly, that it has to be as a result of social deviance and conflicts with society. Because like at that point, it seems pretty clear that anything that is sort of broadly accepted by society isn't, like, at least under this point, is going to be excluded.
Yeah, I think
so
it's
like
sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think it says primarily because it
Okay.
would include some stuff like that is not in conflict. Not
Yeah,
it's not
that
social
makes
deviance,
sense.
but that's
Yeah.
the primary cause or primary result of. And I think that one's probably misleading because it sounds like it's calling the people like they might be deviant, but it's not. That's not what it means. It means they deviate from social norms.
Okay,
and
see.
that causes conflict with society.
Okay, and it says here that the definition considers these 5 factors, but are these factors all sort of
So this is the next bit, which is really important, actually.
Okay, yeah, that might be helpful.
So it's not only what they use.
Okay.
Psychiatrists sometimes have to use their clinical judgment to say whether somebody's. There's all these diagnoses, but sometimes it's about kind of figuring it out with that individual.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not an exhaustive list. It's just the working definition that we have, and it's changed considerably from the DSM-3, and that DSM-3 was out, I think, in the let's say the 90s or something like that. I may be well off there. Army just wants to Google it. I'm going to Google it.
Isn't it like every 10 or 15 years it gets updated?
1980 it was published. So yeah, so in the last 40 years, there's been a considerable change, which you'd expect, right?
The more we learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There is a bit that said about. I can't find it. I can't remember. But yeah. And a lot of these things, like when we're talking about psychobiological dysfunction, that could be like a mild, what's it called? Neurotransmitter imbalance, right? Or it could be a massive kind of brain lesion. Yeah, so it's not. I think most mental health disorders can be identified through physiological signs, but that doesn't mean that physiological signs are always the cause of the it's about which came first, the chicken or the egg, so usually it's trauma causes a change in thinking, and then that causes the brain chemistry to change. And that's why whilst you can use medication like SSRIs and stuff like that, benzodiazepines, etc., to try and treat symptoms, it won't treat the cause. It won't treat that change in that thought process or that trauma, and that's what you need to then treat whilst their symptoms are under control. And that goes for most.
And
sorry, go on, Dave.
Just to bring up something that's probably kind of obvious, you can't really treat religion with medication.
No, exactly. Yeah, so that's the other thing, is you don't get these same kind of psychobiological markers in religious people that you do in in non-religious people with mental illness, right? or even religious people's mental illness.
It was mental illness.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, if people were so one of the like indicators of psychosis, for instance, is like an imbalance of dopamine. I think it might be too much dopamine. I want to say too much. Yeah, I want to say too much dopamine.
Constantly in a kind of high and a rushy kind of state.
Yeah, yeah, and it causes firings of nerves. Yeah. Oh God, I'm tired and I'm rusty. I feel rusty. But you don't get that in a God belief. You don't get that same kind of like imbalance or like that dopamine. Like if you gave antipsychotics to somebody without who just has a religious belief, all you're gonna do is make them sleepy, basically. Yeah. So, that's it, really. You know. So it's kind of like if it was a delusion or some sort of psychosis, then you would see an effect from antipsychotics on their beliefs, but you don't. And that what that means is that they're genuinely held beliefs. They're not delusional beliefs. And trying to pick apart what that is really what the difference is really complex for people that don't understand what delusion is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just go with the idea that that they were sort of that people that are religious were sort of forced into it by their upbringing to some extent, right? But I think it's not as easy to understand at that point, for example, other beliefs, right, that the parents might have, what like, because a lot of people will say that it's brainwashing or to some extent. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Luke.
I think yeah, I have. Were you going to say another point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I think that there needs to be discussion that about when can something be called brainwashing and when it's just something that the parent shares with their kids, and that they sort of teach them because they believe in it, right? Which is like a ton of things, pretty much everything goes under that category, right? So at some point the question arises, when is it actually brainwashing, and what does it need? What is necessary for it to be called brainwashing? Because otherwise it's just hard to distinguish. Sorry, go ahead.
I think for me, like, so I think the term indoctrination gets bandied around too much, right? Indoctrination, you're indoctrinated to become Christian, right? But like, I don't doubt for a second that the atheists that are saying that would bring their kids up atheist, and that would be indoctrination, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of what the idea is, if you're forcing your ideas upon your children, without, and this is the key part for me in terms of what indoctrination is, without allowing them to access any other materials and experience other ideas, that's indoctrination. So like that guy that we were talking to in the Braxton thing, right? When he was saying that he was not going, even thinking about what one would he like to do if he found out Christianity was false. He said, I wouldn't even entertain the idea because then I'd start to doubt my faith, right? That's indoctrination. But if somebody goes, I've considered everything and this is still what I believe, that's not indoctrination. And if parents bring kids up with that concept that you can look at other things and you can go talk to atheists and you can go talk to Muslims and you can go talk to Buddhists, and that person retains their faith, that's not because they're indoctrinated. That's because they genuinely believe in that faith.
They believe
right?
it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with cults, right? Cults use specific psychological tricks in order to make sure that they're like they come in and they love bomb you, then they put you to work and make you exhausted, so your mental faculties are really low. Then they introduce
Don't
ideas
feed you properly.
slowly. Sorry.
They don't feed you properly.
Right.
Either.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then they isolate you from your family, tell you that you're gonna, you can't talk to anyone, have to hand in your phone, all that stuff, right? They do a lot of these kind of tricks, right? And to then compare like a normal everyday church to a cult, that's really insulting.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
And
Though I will bring up a bit of a controversial point. I'm interested, like, because you could say, for example, like, you probably wouldn't be really giving your kid, I would imagine, sort of access to certain content that you deem to be highly, for example, immoral, right? That's a big one, probably, right? For example, you wouldn't presumably give your kid access to sort of Adolf Hitler's ideas, right? Up front, I would assume, right? And there is in general this idea that I don't know how correct it is, but to shield kids from certain types of content until they're sort of mature enough or something like that. So I guess that could be like I because you said something about when something counts as being indoctrination, where you're not allowing the person to form up their own ideas or access even to the material that is disconforming to what you're teaching him or something like that. I don't know if that's enough in this context. I don't know what your thoughts on this are.
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. I think there is a an element of protecting your children from harmful ideas, but I do think that, like, even with Hitler's ideas, I do think that it's important that people understand why he believed what he believed.
Oh yeah, I do
Right?
agree with that.
And
by the way.
and that would be the thing. If you completely say this is untouchable, you're not allowed to read any of Hitler's ideas. Like, I think that it would create a situation where people feel like they kind of like, well, why? What are they hiding from me, kind of thing, and then they're drawn into it.
Create
Yeah.
a backfire effect.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
massively.
happening in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I know about what Hitler's ideas are. My dad didn't stop me from reading up on it, and when I had conversations with him about World War II, he was very open with me about what the thoughts were. Honestly, as well, he didn't just paint Hitler as this evil character who did this bad things. He was like, this is what Hitler believed, and then was like, this is why it's wrong. And it's about mediating those concepts. So, like, if you're an atheist parent bringing up a child, and you say, here's Christianity, here's what's good about it, but here are all the things that are bad about it, and you do the same thing with Christianity about atheism or whatever. That's not indoctrination. That's giving them the information, and then they can make their own decisions.
I agree. Yeah.
I think mediation is the key in parenting. Like, and obviously I'm speaking as not a parent, but I think mediation, like, it's better for kids, like, if to not be stopped from doing things, like, even like, like, I think in England, well, I know, like, my parents would give me some drinks when I was a kid, like some watered down wine and stuff like that, and it made drinking alcohol less of a big thing when I came to 18. So, it was, I still had fun and still went out and drank, but I was like, I know what my limits are, I know what it tastes like, I know what it feels like, so it was easier for me to kind of get into that space and safer. And I think it's the same thing with ideas.
Yeah, I agree.
And I do think there are lots of Christians that do that.
I think I think that there is a tendency for religious people, and I don't think that it's universal, by the way, which is why I don't think it's fair to characterize it as religion causes this. But I do think that there is, like, probably, at least this is my perception, a high percentage of parents that would sort of impose their religion in a much harder sense than an atheist would do for atheism, right? I hear a lot of atheists say, oh, well, I just teach them about all the religions and about why I don't believe in them, and I'll let them sort of make up their own mind about it. I'm certain that there are some atheists that are going to be much stricter with that, but I do think that there's this tendency in religion to be stricter, and I do think that part of that is maybe how big of a role religion plays in the identities of the parents, and how much parents tend to think that religion informs the moral side of the things as well, right? Because there's a lot of this talk going around that atheists can't be moral and stuff like that atheists are eating children and stuff. I mean, this is a bit of an exaggeration now, but this type of fear mongering, right? And I think that because of this, some religious parents are going to be genuinely terrified to see their kids, sort of not be convinced of their claims. And I think that is why we see this sort of thing happen more often
Yeah.
in religious families, and that's why a lot of atheists then sort of are resentful towards that, because I think they feel this strong pressure that they experienced, and this sort of like what they would presumably describe as dogmatism to some extent. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's entirely unfair to make this observation.
No, I think I agree with you actually, and I think that a lot of I think you could easily say, as a parent, I want my child to be saved, and the only way that they can be saved
Yeah,
is through the
that's
belief
as
in
well.
Christ.
That's another thing as
you
well,
know.
right? Because if you do believe in eternal conscious torment, right, then there is like, I think as a parent, I actually understand these parents,
Yeah.
right? If you do believe that, then it seems pretty obvious why you would be hell of scared, like you would be really scared if you see your children turn away from what you think is the only way to not end up there, because that just seems a direct consequence that if you love these people, right, if you love your children, you should do your best to not make them end up there. And so I think there are certain ideas in religions, and particularly in Christianity in this case, that I do think that if held to in a specific way, can be really, really, really harmful.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. But I do think that even if indoctrination was to be the source of somebody's beliefs, and they were isolated from all other ideas, and they were only told that you believe this or you have this torment, which is basically what we're saying, right? That would still not be mental illness, because they would still have from their upbringing, they will still have a justified reason for believing in that stuff, and a justified reason for not believing in anything else.
Yeah, I agree. It wouldn't be classified as a mental illness. I think it's just a very fucked up belief, and something that can be very harmful to children if you hold that belief as a parent.
Beliefs on their own are not mental illness, and they're not even delusions. Because you can believe in things for a number of reasons, but if people are telling you as you're growing up, this is the truth, this is what it is, and your whole community say the same thing, and then they warn you about the types of people that will try and sway you from that path, they're the devil people, you're gonna believe it, and that's not mental illness. That's just, as you said, a fucked up belief, that they can't help. So yeah, it's about kind of just separating out these ideas a bit. I think that just because also just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it's not true. People didn't believe in the, I have to get this right, heliocentric model. But the heliocentric model was true. Were all those people delusional? No, they weren't delusional.
I mean, of course they weren't. Like I was about to say.
Well, lots of scientists at the time that the Big Bang Theory was first proposed mocked the Big Bang Theory until they came around. So
yeah, exactly. And I'm sure
all of them were delusional.
Yeah.
I'm sure in 50 years there's going to be theories that we have today that are going to be completely blown out the water, and people are going to look back on us and go, why did they believe that? Why did they believe, I don't know, something about quantum physics or something?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if God showed himself tomorrow. What would all those atheists calling religious people mentally ill and delusional think of themselves then?
Exactly. So it's a really tenuous position to hold, that that religion is just mental illness. And I think after I've gone through these couple of resources afterwards, we can discuss around actually religion and mental illness, what the actual connection is, because there is a little bit of one. I think I just want to see if there's anything in the chat. I don't know if you guys have been looking at it, but I haven't.
Yeah, passingly, yes.
Is there anything really interesting I should read out?
I think some of the things that Chesh was saying, I agree with strongly. For example, the idea that it seems really fucked up to me, as Chesh says that you use sort of mental illness as a weapon against theism, right? That just is very, very disgusting to me. Especially, and I think it's going to be insulting to anyone that sort of suffers from some sort of a mental illness or something like that. To see themselves compared with perfectly happy people that just think that there is a God. I
Yeah.
think that's a bit.
Yeah, and that's something I think after these things, and we can actually isolate what mental illness is and how it affects people, then we can actually have maybe a bigger conversation around that. So I just want to go on to this thing, which is a very good essay called "Is Faith Delusion" by Professor Andrew Sims.
We had to read this for our philosophy of religion.
Oh, really? This is
Yeah.
excellent. This is so good. And, I'm surprised that so many atheists believe that faith is a delusion, because when you Google it, literally Google is faith a delusion, this is the first thing that comes up. So, this has I would recommend reading all of it, because it has such a good argument for why it's not. And I can't articulate better than Professor Andrew Sims that reason. So definitely read it. It's only 10 pages, which is quite short for an essay like this. But there's one thing I was on before. The definition of a delusion. I think this is one of the best definitions of a delusion that gets to the crux of the matter about what delusion actually is. So delusion is a false, unshakable idea or belief which is out of keeping with the patient's educational, cultural, and social background. It is held with extraordinary conviction and subjective certainty. So when somebody's super certain about something, and it differs from their educational, cultural, and social background. So if somebody who has lots of money and is, I don't know, part of the royal family, if they say that they're in contact with the Queen, it could be true, right? If somebody like me says, "Oh yeah, I'm in contact with the Queen. I send her letters. She sends me letters back. We're having an affair." That ain't gonna cut it. That would be a delusion. Okay, so yeah, you have to think like it's outside of the education. So if somebody's education has entirely been religious dogmatism and rhetoric, then it makes sense that they will hold those beliefs. That's not a delusion.
Yeah, I also find it. I mean, I know that you guys mentioned this already, but I find it a bit funny that the vast majority, I think, at least from my experience of people who want to call religion a mental illness, are people who also would prefer to die rather than accept the burden of proof to show that theism is actually false.
Yeah.
And the first condition here seems to be that the delusion is a false belief,
false,
right?
yeah.
So if you're not willing to argue that point, then you shouldn't even begin to argue that it is a delusion, right? So,
and they'd also argue that they're not saying that God doesn't exist. They just don't believe he exists. So if they don't think it's false that God exists, how can they say?
So they say, are they therefore
delusion.
saying it's delusional to just hold a belief that God exists?
Yeah.
I don't
So
know how that can be.
A rocket being an atheist, that's perfectly non-delusional, but
Okay, we won't get into the rocket atheist thing. I think the second paragraph is really important though, because this really clears it up, because sometimes delusions match up with reality to a certain extent. So there's ways of finding out whether it's a delusion or not. So delusion is held on delusional grounds. So a man knew with absolute certainty that his wife was being unfaithful to him. Subsequently, it transpired that she was being unfaithful at that time. Okay, but it's still a delusion. And the reason is because the delusion, the reason for his certainty was he would say, when I come out of the house and past the fifth lamppost on the right, it had gone out. Then I knew with certainty that she was unfaithful. So he had a delusion that just happened to be true. But the reason that he had that, the reason he had that certainty was because of something delusional grounds. Yeah.
There's a disconnect between the epistemic justification and the belief.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I just want to point out that this seems to contradict the definition that we just read at the beginning, though. Right? Because if a delusion is a false idea, and this seems to point out that it can be true, but it's just held because of completely disconnected reasons, right? This seems to contradict what we just pointed out.
No, so it is false because so the full sentence would be, the reason my wife the reason I'm certain my wife is cheating on me is because the fifth lamppost on the left went out. So that statement is false because he can't know that his wife is cheating on him because of that.
Yeah. Okay. I
It's
guess.
the
I
whole
guess
belief.
I guess the thing would be the false proposition would be the conditional that if the lamp post on like I don't know what the sentence was, but if the thing that he believes to be the cause of his wife cheating or the reason. Wait a minute. Let me just read this to formulate it correctly. So. When it came out of the house and past the fifth lamppost on the right, it had gone out. So basically, the false proposition is that if the fifth lamppost on the right is gone out, then my wife is cheating on me, right? This would be a proposition that can be true and false. And he thinks that this is a true proposition, but it's clearly false. And that would be the false thing. Is that what you're saying, Luke?
Yeah. So
Okay.
So the ground, because someone could say like, and it's just probability really. It's nothing more than probability, Like if somebody believes that the MI5 are chasing them because their neighbor cut the hedges this morning, it's a delusion even if the MI5 are chasing them.
Yeah.
The delusional grounds is like creates the whole belief, and that's really clear when you interact with people with psychosis and delusional beliefs. You really get that because they start saying things like, I knew it because of this reason, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Which is where it's it's really interesting. And this could feed into a God belief. If somebody has a God belief and then they're having a delusional experience, they may be like, I know my wife is unfaithful because God told me when I was at work, right? Psychiatrists would see that as a delusional belief.
Okay.
Belief in God is not a delusion. Right? That's the
Okay.
difference.
Yeah, would it be like this is an interesting question. Would it be a delusion to say believe in the proposition if let's say if I'm missing my left sock in the morning, then God exists or something like that? Would belief in this would it be classified as a delusion?
I
of
think
some
if
sort?
someone said that I think if someone came and spoke to a
Like
psychiatrist and they said God exists,
they're
how do you
extremely
know?
confident.
Because my
Yeah,
left
that they're
sock is
extremely
gone. Yeah.
confident that God exists because they miss their sock in the morning every once in a while, something like that.
Yeah, and that would be especially the case for somebody who doesn't have a religious background or religious history.
Okay.
Because if they have like a religious background, it could just be that they're having some sort of like cognitive issue rather than it being like a delusion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense.
So if they've been educated in believing, and then it may just be that they have a memory loss issue or something like that. So this is the thing. People are really complex, and trying to figure out what exactly it is that's going on with someone's mind isn't easy at all. But we have to define these things and holding a belief. So actually, Icarus has just come in and said it's believing in a flat Earth a delusion. No, it's not, and that's because okay. Let me clarify this. It's not on its own. Yeah. So we always have to look at the reasons behind why people are saying these things. So if somebody says, like, I had a guy who had bipolar. He was in an extreme manic phase, and he had delusions, and he didn't believe in a flat Earth before he was manic, but he had a conversation with one of his friends who was a flat earther, and then he started going into like a hole about it, and then started coming up with his own delusions about it, like saying about kind of like about like governmental conspiracies that weren't online and stuff. He kind of made them up in his mind and stuff. So he had delusions around the flat Earth being flat. But somebody who's just looked at the evidence, someone who looks at the what's it called, the horizon, and sees it's flat, and who have seen documentaries about the moon landing being faked, and have really been pulled in by this stuff. That's not delusion, because they're looking at evidence and then making a decision. So it's a genuinely held belief.
Yeah. They would believe that is evidence for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to differentiate between the two is really tough. And that's why you need years of training in being in psychology and psychiatry and meeting these people to do it. Because
and I also think it's helpful to just remind ourselves what we are sort of saying here in some sense, right? We're not saying that there cannot be someone that believes in a God that is delusional, right? And that believes in a God because of a delusion, right? Because what we're saying is pretty much what we're fighting against is the idea that all belief in a God, right, is delusional by definition, right? So as long as there's a single member, right, that believes in a God but is not delusional, right, that disproves the idea that belief in a God is delusional to some extent. So I think it's we could even say, like, and we're not saying this, I think, at least not, I'm not saying it, definitely not, but we could even say that 50% of people who believe in a God, are delusional. But that would still not mean that religion or belief in a God is delusional by itself.
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, I would say that it's the vast majority of people that believe in God have a genuinely held belief, and it's very few.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the percentage of mentally ill people in religious institutions is higher than the average population. I think that's true, but I still think the majority of people who go to religious institutions have perfectly sound minds.
Yeah, but like when you say that, for instance, that they genuinely believe in a God, right? I think the person that is described in this piece here about his wife cheating.
So,
do you think that he genuinely believes that is a good reason?
He has a genuinely held belief, but
yeah,
I guess I'm trying to differentiate from beliefs that are born out of delusions and beliefs that are born out of rational processing. So because delusions, it's really interesting having a conversation with somebody with a delusion, because they'll start to talk about something very I had a conversation with somebody who has he's got schizoaffective disorder, which is essentially kind of like a psychotic mood disorder. And he was talking to me about very normal things, and then suddenly started asking me about if I lived near a prison. And then he said, "Oh, because," and then he said the name of somebody who I didn't know. He said, "Oh, he told me you live near a prison." And then I was like, "No, I don't live near a prison." And he was like, "Do you live near an airport then?" And then he started going on about like the airport and stuff, and how this person had told him that I lived near these places. And then I figured out who that person was. That person was real, but that person was like, "No, I didn't even speak to him about you at all," right? And that person was having a delusional kind of like thought process at that time, and was starting to have delusions that it wasn't that he was lying, or that he, it was that he believed that situation had happened, and then he was asking me about it. So delusions are really hard to hide when someone's having them. And we've got a video actually coming up about somebody who has like a bipolar, and they're in the manic phase, and they start to talk about delusional thoughts and stuff, and it's actually related to God. So I think it's a really good version, and we can actually see what that looks like. I'm sure there's going to be people that say there's no difference between that and a normal Christian, but there is, and I'll explain what the differences are, because they are very subtle. So we could do that now if you guys want.
Yeah. Totally down.
Okay.
One thing I'll say is, one way I can put this in a language that many of them might understand, they're committing a hasty generalization fallacy.
Yeah.
They love their
They
fallacies.
like to throw around the fallacies, yeah. But they're actually committing this one.
So I looked up psychotic delusions interview. There's actually very few. I struggled to find some. But we'll watch the first few minutes, but the actual delusional kind of conversation doesn't come out until like properly, like really clearly until later on. So I'm going to skip some of it just because it's a lot of talking. He talks a lot because he's manic. He barely takes a breath. So and you'll see that. So let's play. And it's old, black and white.
You talked with God?
That's right. As I'll talk to you.
Tell me about that.
Well, now, sir, this is the way I am about a God. If God told us that if we ask, we shall receive.
Can you guys hear it?
But I think no,
No.
we cannot.
Oh, wait a second.
But I think there is an issue with this. This might be an issue with Discord, though. Unfortunately.
Oh,
Everybody quickly go to that web address and press play.
Yeah, that might be the best way to do it.
Guys, I'll put it in the chat.
What's the name?
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, in the chat. Oh, okay. Here we go. Okay.
So I'm going to play the first 4 minutes, and then I'm going to skip to 8 minutes 30. So if you guys just do that when you're in your own time, I'll play it for the audience.
Yeah,
now.
just a second so that I can.
There had to be one technical issue. I thought it would share sound as well, but apparently not.
Yeah, no, I think there's an issue with the way Discord streams on macOS that's been going on for quite a while.
Right, I see. Yeah, you guys can hear it because it's coming through my speakers. So.
Yeah, that might be a solution. Another solution, by the way.
Oh yeah, you guys
do
could
that.
just mute yourselves and listen to it on the stream if you have it open. It's going to be a bit delayed, but
yeah.
Okay, I'm
It
gonna
would
mute
be
you.
it would be a bit weird, I think.
I'm going to press play if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah.
You talked with God?
That's right. As I'll talk to you.
Tell me about that.
Well, now, sir, this is the way I am about a God.
Still can't
If God told us that if we ask, we shall receive. Seek, you shall find. Knocking, it shall be open. And God has told us that He says to do unto others as you would have Him to do unto you.
Mm-hmm. You talk to God in this room?
In this way.
Uh-huh.
And then we know that the prayers of God, He says He hears all things and knows all things.
Mm-hmm.
And does all things. There is nothing without Him that He should not hear. But it's this way with me and my God. I ask God to help me to learn these things that I know. And you know, He's the greatest physician that ever lived.
Mm-hmm. And He helped you learn things.
He helped me learn what I know today. And I've got no other man to thank but Him.
And you've been learning about
the things of nature. Mm-hmm. In that case, that's the reason I said as I did this morning. Because I know the things of nature, because God has given me the wisdom and the knowledge to understand it.
Uh-huh. What have you learned about nature?
Well, I've learned nature is a great thing to be in existence. And when nature goes away from you, then there's in the remora for the nature that happened. Mm-hmm. And that's all of human life has been on the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. It's God's got it record somewhere. Now we know that, don't we?
And you.
So I'm just going to pause it at 1:30, and then I'm going to go to 8:31 because you got an idea there basically.
Yeah.
That he's starting to talk about his relationship with God, but also that God's taught him stuff. He then goes on to say in this middle bit that God's taught him about engineering and taught him about nature, and this is the bit where he starts talking about surgery, which is really interesting. So that's why I'm going to skip to this bit. So 8 minutes 30.
To make a good boss.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'd have to work with the assistant to make a good boss. You'd have to work with him and do everything he would. Is that right? To make a good assistant doctor or an intern, you had to study it and learn it. Well, I was 15 years old when I started learning the doctoring business.
Mm-hmm.
You know where I was at? They didn't let me. They examined me and they worked on me and they operated on me, but they had a special place that I always studied every day. And you know why I studied? I studied with my eyes.
So I think that's probably enough to demonstrate his delusion. I don't know where you guys are at, but the bit where he says, "I study it with my eyes" from 8 minutes 30. Yeah.
Yeah, I just stopped there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's manic. He's having delusional thoughts, right? He started talking about being an engineer. He started talking about being taught around nature, and then he's talking about at the age of 15, he was an assistant doctor, and in order to train, they operated on him, and then he only had to study with his eyes in order to become an assistant doctor, which is clearly, regardless of you know, what we know about this gentleman, not true, right? But he's saying it was conviction, and he's saying that all of this learning and stuff came from God, essentially. And I think this is a really good example of like a psychotic delusion, because it shows how someone can be quite convincing when they're talking about it, but then also there's really obvious pitfalls when you actually start to listen to what they say. Yeah. It's not this whole like acting. Psychosis isn't always this whole like like that you see in movies and stuff. It can be someone just having a conversation and just saying stuff that is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And very unlikely.
Yeah, extremely. Like, do you think that they operated on him for his training? Even whenever this is set, I don't know when it's set, when it happened. You know, I think it's like the 1960s.
You mentioned that there are some sort of subtle things about the way he goes about his beliefs, I guess. That's a sort of revealing that it's a delusion. Are these the ones that you mentioned already, or is there something in addition to that?
I think so. If you watch the whole thing, he changes subject very quickly. So he'll start talking about God, then he'll start talking about nature, then he starts talking about engineering, and then he goes on to surgery. And in a 12-minute conversation, that's a lot to talk about.
I see.
Right? And that's one of the subtle things that you can pick up on if you're talking with someone with a delusion, is they change subject really quickly because their delusions bounce off of each other, and then they start to kind of like it's almost like so like for instance, someone who I had a conversation with whilst they were delusional, they were like talking about being Jesus, and then they started talking about aliens like a minute later, and then they took me outside and was like, the aliens are coming to pick me up, and then they started nodding their head and started going like, the aliens are here, they're going to pick me up, like I can hear them and stuff, and then they started talking about being Jesus again shortly after that. So it's like the delusions don't necessarily change, but it's just that they're bounced between what they're talking about, and they're not always as extreme as like aliens and Jesus. That's just usually someone's upbringing influences what their delusions are about. So if they were brought up religious, they're more likely to have religious delusions, actually, which kind of makes that harder. That's why in religion, it's really hard to pick apart who does have delusions and who doesn't, because that's the basis of their delusional thinking.
I see.
And that's why it can be quite damaging for people to be psychotic and in a church. I agree with that. I agree with that entirely. Yeah. But that doesn't mean this is the thing. Like, okay, I'm just going to change it back to the three of us because we've touched on all of those things. So we're going to go into be right back mode again. Okay, that was quick.
Hooray!
So I forgot what I was saying though before.
About there can be people in the church that
Yeah.
are delusional, and
Yeah.
church can be harmful.
So this is the thing, right? I don't deny. I think you've touched on this today, Philip. I think Cheshire touched on it. I think you probably touched on it as well, Dave. I don't deny that. I think that church isn't the best place for people with mental illness, and I don't think I don't deny that some specific churches, more strict ones that are isolating and not good for somebody's like psychology can cause mental illness. I do agree with that, but that doesn't mean that religion itself is caused by religion is developed from mental illness, or that that religion itself is a mental illness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, like there's a disconnect. I think sometimes I don't know what they mean when they say religion is a mental illness, because there is religion is a mental illness and believing in a god is mental illness, right? And these two seem not exactly the same statement, right? Because a religion is not just characterized by sort of a group of people that do think that God exists. Like certain religions don't even have that, right? Like they're non-theistic religions.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure what they mean when they say that religion is a mental illness. Like I suppose that they mean that, you know, believing in a God is mental illness, and sometimes it's spelled out that way. That's why I'm assuming that. But it would be even weirder to say that religion is a mental illness, I think, because religion is not a psychological state. It's more like sort of
With the
An
rituals.
yeah, it's a
institution.
collection of rituals and practices, right? And at best, what you could say is that those sort of cause mental illness or something like that, but they themselves cannot be a mental illness because they're not a psychological
But
state.
even then, I would say that most, well, maybe not most. I don't know. Most religions, I don't think, would cause mental illness.
No, I
And
don't
then
think
mental
so.
illnesses that are caused by those religions that do cause it aren't exclusive to those religions. Like, if you get anything, any kind of group where you have a group of people who have strict doctrine and are not allowing people to reach outside of that and develop relationships with others, there's going to be issues with somebody's mental health in that situation, and there are secular versions of that. You know, I mean, Scientology, I think, like, if we're talking about, well, I guess that's still a religion, but there's secular versions of that as well. You know, certain militaries probably are like that.
Like firmly holding on to the idea that belief in God is a delusion,
Yes.
and not changing your mind
Yeah.
when confronted with evidence that it's not.
Yeah.
But there's like another version, there's another aspect to this as well, which is the kind of issues that this can cause people who do have mental illness, right? Because what you're saying is essentially that because somebody believes something you don't agree with, that they're mentally ill, but you're using it in a dismissive way. You're using it in a way that's attempting to be degrading. You're like going, well, you know, they must have a mental illness, which is a value judgment on mental illness, and that's not okay. That's absolutely not okay. You know, and people are like, oh yeah, we're more liberal. Atheists are more like, we're more liberal. We care about people more. We actually do stuff, and then they like throw these flippant remarks out. And this is a problem in general that I have with society about psychosis not being as heavily included in like the destigmatization of mental illness. It's mostly depression and anxiety. No one really talks about psychosis. No one tries to understand it.
Yeah,
more.
that's true. That's true.
Or bipolar, really. People talk about bipolar still as if it's like just some ups and downs during your week.
Yeah.
They don't understand that, you know, if someone has a manic day, they're going to go out and they're going to be broke by the end of that day because they're going to have spent all their money, or they might have cheated on their partner. You know, or they might have bought tickets to a different country and gone on holiday.
Yeah.
Like on their own, you know, it's really bad. What happens with people who are manic is not just being like, oh, I feel a bit happy today. Oh no, I feel a bit rough now. That's not it. You know, and it's stigmatizing. You know, it's yeah. I can talk about this all day. It's stigmatization. But then also what you see as well is like people pathologizing themselves. People saying, oh, I feel a bit worried about going on stage to give this speech. I must have anxiety. Like, what are you chatting about? That's normal. You know, or, oh, I feel a bit anxious about my job interview. No, you're not. It's not interfering with your life enough for you to have anxiety, right? Yeah. And that's not destigmatizing mental illness. That's watering down what the meaning is. to make it
Yeah.
meaningless, right? A bit like
Yeah,
it's a rock
yeah.
argument. If everyone has anxiety, then what's the point in the term? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That hits close to home to some extent. So
Well, yeah, I thought it would. So apologies if it was too much.
yeah,
but...
no. It wasn't problematic. It's just sort of like a
Well, like
thing
when
that I think
people
about a lot. So
talk
I was
about
like
you
sort
with
of
it.
agreeing with you.
Yeah, like just it frustrates me. So yeah, that's how it stigmatizes mental health. So I guess that was a bit of a rant. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think it's also like maybe that's why I think a lot of people want to criticize religion and its approach to mental illness, right? And that's why they come out with these sort of like really sort of overly generalizing statements, right? But I think sometimes if you want to really get to the point and really sort of actually inquire into why they're saying what they're saying, they may have certain things that are kind of reasonable to some extent, right? Like, for example, the idea that the relationship between religion and mental health is not exactly always magnificent, because I think there tends to be this tendency to not seek for help if you have certain sort of mental problems at the moment, because you think that you can fix things, right, just by going to church and stuff like that, and so you're gonna be less likely to seek professional advice if you have sort of these types of problems. So I think there are certain there are good arguments that you can make, right, against religion to this extent. Although I think the reason why they don't employ them is because it's easy to see how religion is not necessarily tied to these types of behaviors, right? Like a religion could just not do these things, and then it wouldn't be a problem. But you want to say something against religion in general, and so that's why you are forced sort of to make these sort of general statements. And I think, but that's where I think there is a mistake, right? It's fine to criticize religion in these sorts of bits where I think you can make really good arguments, but I don't think that generalizing it is helpful. I think it's actually doing the exact opposite. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it comes out of this because if atheists started to say, actually we have arguments against why God exists, maybe just maybe they wouldn't need to resort to belittling, degrading, humiliating other people.
But it's so weird, right? Because like the idea that God doesn't exist is arguably a stronger and more extreme position than the idea that I just lack a belief in God or don't believe in God. Yet we see the people that are most aggressive about it are the people who just claim to lack a belief. That group is extremely toxic, at least online, right? And a lot of people that I know that just comfortable saying I don't think, like, I believe God doesn't exist, right? They are completely chill people, right? Like they have like a very, I think, helpful approach in the conversations surrounding theism and religion. And like the opposite is true of people who supposedly hold the less strong position and are just sort of lacking a belief. So that's also like really surprising to me.
Yeah. Just saying it all comes back to this. It all comes back to this complete garbage.
Why?
It does. It does. Well, because they wouldn't have an excuse. They wouldn't have an excuse if they had these better arguments for why religion is false or whatever, And I hate to bring it up, but you can prove it negative. You can. It's a pretty standard practice in science, and all these people that are into empirical research. There's more empirical research that shows there's no effect between X and Y than there is an effect between X and Y. Yeah. There's way more research that has null results or results that prove a negative. Like, just the way it works, because we try things and then it's like, oh, actually, there's not an effect there.
So that's proving negative. But not only in science, right? Like logic 101, pretty much, right? Modus tollens. It's like I've been saying this for a while now, right? It's trivially easy, right? It's one of the most popular valid forms in our argument to prove a negative, right?
Yeah.
So it's Yeah, it's really weird.
What I love
Most
is sorry, go on, Dave.
Sorry, I was just going to say most people who say something like, well, this is just Logic 101 in an argument have never actually taken a
so
Logic
hilarious.
101 class. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so hilarious.
Yeah. What I love is when people say you can't prove a negative, and then they say something's unfalsifiable.
Yeah, that's
and then it's like,
that's
wait a
so
second,
fun.
if it was falsifiable, then you'd be able to prove it untrue.
Yeah, exactly. Because like this is the thing that you discovered the other day in the conversation on Twitter, right? Like a lot of atheists love the idea of falsifiability, right? They go on for days about how great falsifiability is, right? But then they simultaneously say that you can't prove a negative, right? But these two ideas are in conflict, right? Because if you can't prove a negative, then everything is unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
Because like what falsifiability means is that you're able to show that it's wrong, and if you say that you can't prove a negative, then that means that everything is unfalsifiable. So like I don't. There's a lot of this stuff that is just sort of like takes that get grabbed from various places online, and then they're sort of meshed together. And
Yeah. I think in the cases where they talk about falsifiability and not being able to prove a negative, when they say falsifiability, what they mean is proving something wrong. Whereas when they say you can't prove a negative, it's the equivalent of saying you can't prove that something doesn't exist. Which, it still doesn't deny that falsifiability can't prove something doesn't exist.
But yeah, that's the whole. Yeah.
But I think they just don't
Yeah.
understand the terms that they're using.
Yeah, like I think, maybe this is the thing, right? Because they say that something doesn't exist, right? Rather than a statement that is sort of expressing a negation of something, right? Because
Yeah.
like the most obvious example of this is that saying you can't prove a negative is in itself a negative statement, right? Like
Yeah.
So I think that I hope that at least this is pretty evident to the people that say this. So I expect them to say something like, oh, but things, and I've seen this happen in conversations with people that say this, right? That they pivot to something like, oh, but something that exists out there in the real world, right? You can't show that doesn't exist, right? But then that is also trivially easy to do because you can say, think like I've said this before, right? Giants that are like half the size of Earth, right, do not exist, right? At least that live on Earth, I guess, do not exist, right? Because you would be able to observe them, and this is basically what the logical form would be, right? If these giants were to exist, then you would be able to observe them, but you're not able to observe them, so they don't exist, right? This is modus tollens, right? So, there are a lot of things that you can show, even things that supposedly exist out there. You can show that these things do not exist, right, through this form. Then when this happens, then it usually goes even further, right? Then it goes, oh well, but something that is not observable, right? The classic example is
Black swan fallacy.
Yeah, the teapot would be an example, right? Like that gets thrown out, or like an invisible, unmeasurable, right thing. These types of things. But then you get into the unfalsifiability
but this is
sort of territory. And what you're saying then is essentially unfalsifiable things cannot be falsified. Like,
well, they can't be unfalsified either.
No shit,
That's the whole
Sherlock,
point.
right? Like unfalsifiable things are unfalsifiable. That's the point, right? So
they can't be proved or not proved. That's the problem with unfalsifiability. We just go from a point of trying to prove it untrue in order to prove, like, so in science you work from the null hypothesis in order to reach a conclusion about whether something is true or not. But you're just saying, this is not going to have an effect on the earth in order to remove your bias. Essentially, it's like kind of etiquette in science to do that. And it's good statistical practice to do that because, like, we have a 95% confidence rating for the null hypothesis and only 5% for anything else, and that's because we want to make sure that we're entirely confident that there is an effect, right? So yeah, I think it's really silly. Like, as soon as we start talking about unfalsifiable things, it's like you can't prove this. It's like, well, yeah, of course you can't. Like, but there's other ways of thinking about these things,
Yeah, and another good way to think about this is that usually unfalsifiable things do not have explanatory power, right? They don't explain anything, right? That's why they are unfalsifiable, because as soon as you want to explain something, you have to say how this relates to something that you observe, right? And this exposes you to the risk that if you don't make this observation, then by modus tollens, you're proving the thing wrong, right? At least if this is a necessary entailment of the thing that you're observing, and you're not directly proving it wrong, but it counts as evidence against it if it's not a direct entailment, right, of the thing. So things that are unfalsifiable do not explain anything. They don't have an explanatory power. So you can exclude these types of things on sort of in a theory choice context, right? You can say things, look, I have two hypotheses, right? My hypothesis has everything that your hypothesis has, minus this unfalsifiable thing that you say should be in there, right? But my hypothesis explains just as much as yours does, but has less elements in it. It's simpler.
That's
right?
that's kind of how I feel about
It's
like
more-
deistic gods.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's more parsimonious, but that means that it's more likely that this hypothesis is true than the alternative, because I have less things, I explain just as much, and if I have less things positive, like in my ontology here, it's more likely, right, to be true. You can show this sort of in a bias theorem setting as well, right? Like the more things you chain together, right, the more it takes for all of them to be true together. So like there are ways to deal with these types of things, and I think that's why I really think that the whole you can't prove a negative thing is severely misguided most of the time.
Yeah. I did hear. Sorry, just one quick one. I did hear a good one from Segmentation Fault. He said that now when somebody says you can't prove a negative, he asks them if that's a positive or a negative claim.
Yeah, that's
a good one.
Really
I
good.
like that.
Yeah.
So guys, if you have any questions, please start asking them now, because I think we'll just carry on chatting. But I just want to answer. I think we've spoken about the most of the stuff. What is the time? So what? That's for you guys. Can't hear you. Hello? What's happened? No. Wait, am I audible? What's happened? I can't hear anything. You guys aren't even coming through on the thing now. I can't hear anything you're saying. I don't know how to fix this, because it's actually, I can't hear it even from... can you hear me? You can? I'm going to go into be right back mode quickly.
Throw your uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react. You whisper in my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh.
The purple guy as well, isn't he?
Okay, I
Yeah,
think we're
that's
back.
thrown me right the fuck off when I read Twitter.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
why is
Where's
Luke
Luke
answering
yeah.
like that? Yeah.
Why is Luke being Joe? He should just change the color of it and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. I need a producer. I know, I can't afford one. This is all free. I think it's just this Discord had a glitch and just went, nah, I'm not gonna play any sound anymore. Because I played the YouTube video to see if it was Like
Yeah, they were able to hear you. Yes,
they could
I
hear me,
got
but
the
they couldn't
chat.
hear you because your stuff wasn't coming through my screen for some reason. So leaving and coming back in helped. So there we go. Okay, we do have a couple of questions as well. So I think the first one was from Icarus, who asked, "Is a 6-year-old talking to his imaginary friend a delusion? What about an adult asking for a friend?" Well, Icarus, you're an adult, so listen to the adult part. But the interesting thing about kids is that they have really strong, we call it imagination intelligence. They have like our imagination ability to imagine things and kind of do that kind of stuff really goes down over time. And I think imaginary friends are just that, they're imagination. So they're not delusions because they don't even necessarily think that those people exist. It's not necessarily a belief that they hold, it's just them kind of imagining and playing and stuff. And imagination is very different to delusion. Because a delusion is an actual belief that people hold. Or a hallucination, because a hallucination is also like sensory input that's gone wrong, and I don't think they have any sensory input. It's like kind of in their mind, essentially. So no, as an adult, if you have an imaginary friend, I'd give the same answer because it should be in your imagination. But if you're hearing or seeing things that you think are real, and other people can't see them, that's not an imaginary friend. That's a hallucination. And Philip or Dave, do you know the difference between a hallucination and a delusion?
Yeah, I think so. Like hallucination presumably manifests in your sort of perceptive framework. I would suppose. And a delusion, not necessarily that, right? A delusion would be just a belief.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. So a hallucination is sensory, and a delusion is lots of people don't think about hallucinations being like taste and smell or touch. Like some people feel like they're having like creatures crawl over them, smell like rotten flesh and stuff. So it can be quite unpleasant. And they believe they feel like they're real experiences, so they genuinely see people. There was another question, I think. Well, I think it's important to say, Chesh said the moon is made of cheese. My response was that Wallace and Gromit proved that to be true. So the moon is made of cheese, and then she said, "Do they seem like people who would lie?" No, they would not lie.
No.
They're only there's penguins that are master manipulators as well, who just want to steal things from. So we do have a question. I think I'm going to throw this to you guys. How do we approach trying to fix this kind of toxicity, or do we just combat it and sort of make a separate community?
That's an excellent question.
That's really
Yeah.
That's a really, really good question.
I don't think we should necessarily just create a separate community because
Me
that's
neither.
just pawning the problem off.
Yeah.
Sort of like Christians just pawning off extremists saying that's nothing to do with Christianity, and Muslims doing the same thing with Islamic extremists. It's up to us to challenge and confront them and educate them, hopefully.
Yeah, like it's the same issue that you have with other in other fields, right? Where there's something that I mean, I guess it's not exactly the same issue because for example, the thing that came to my mind immediately is, for example, sort of vaccine hesitancy or something like that, right? That seems to be a big topic right now. But like, I don't know if it can be translated exactly, because ultimately, I don't even think that, like, I don't feel in the position, for example, to teach anything per se, right? I don't think that there's, although like it depends on what you mean by teach too. But I think like the best way, and this is something that I think we all are trying to do, is just to put out our views, right? Try to argue them best we can. Try to reach as many people as we can. Hopefully not be overly dismissive. Like this is something that maybe I should do better in sometimes. Maybe I'm overly sort of I don't want to say aggressive, because I don't think that I am that aggressive anymore, at least, and never really was that aggressive. But like maybe sometimes when I see certain takes that make me roll my eyes, it's like I find them funny, and I can't help it almost to make fun of certain things that I think are sort of ridiculous, right? But I do think that that's not really the best way to approach these things. If I look at them from like the perspective of how can I bring these people over to what I think is a better sort of framework to think about things, right? Because doing that, sort of ridiculing them, it's the same type of objection that I have for atheists that try to ridicule theists, right? Like that's why I dislike that when atheists try to ridicule theists to convince them that they are wrong. I don't think that works, and I don't think that I should adopt that sort of way of thinking to sort of try to convince other atheists that they should think of things differently, probably.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think we all probably need to be better at approaching people that we've only just met on Twitter who are using the same arguments we've heard before, because it may be the first time they're hearing something different.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
If it's the same,
Yeah.
if it's like Duke, sorry Duke for mentioning you here, but the amount of times that we've had discussions with Duke, there is a point where you just have to go whatever, But,
yeah, I don't really care about Duke anymore. Honestly.
No, same. It's just an example, like someone
Yeah.
that keeps, no matter how many times you have a conversation with them, they have the same argument, right? So probably shouldn't have named him, but hey, never mind. Still learning.
Better than naming the other person who shall not be named.
He's not
Yeah,
here.
let's not. Yeah.
There's two of them now.
Oh, there's more than two of them now. Like, I haven't counted a few of them.
So yeah, it's like, I think that if you just met someone, it's very important just to kind of try and assume that they haven't had that argument before, and then or at least in a good way,
I agree with that.
But it's tough.
Like, yeah.
I know.
Sorry, go finish it. Yeah.
I noticed in the mental health, the mental illness thread, that when someone new responded with the same argument I'd responded to like 2 hours before, I'd have like a long conversation with someone, and then someone else would put the same point, and then I'd answer as if I was talking to the person who I'd had the long conversation with already. So I was already frustrated. And that's kind of, I should have, at that point, when I realized I was starting to do that, I should have stopped responding to any of them. And that's why I got in such I was like, I just need to get off Twitter because it was stressing me out so much, because I was just getting so frustrated with all of these different threads. And then people were thinking I was being unnecessarily like hostile, which I probably was, but it's just because there was this this other stuff that was going on as well.
Yeah. I also find it hard when other people sort of approach the thing in a specific way, right? Because if someone just comes along and says, "Oh, but I don't think that," like, I don't think that, for example, right? If I know the definition of atheism again, right? But like, if someone comes along and says, "Oh, I don't think that atheism means that, though," right? I think this is how I think of it, or something, right? Like, I would be much more inclined. Actually, I would be very likely to engage this person very kindly, very politely, and have a good conversation, I expect, and be done with it, and maybe even disagree at the end. But I expect this to be a good conversation, and I engage in a certain way, right? But if someone comes, caps lock into the comment section, right, and just screams, there is only one meaning to, like, this is the only meaning to atheism, right? And you're being a cryptotheist because you're paddling theistic, stuff like that. Then you tend to have a different response to that, and I think that's maybe where I become a bit unpleasant to interact with, and I'm trying not to do that. Maybe I should just ignore these types of things.
Yeah.
But sometimes I can't help it, and it's just like almost a stress relief to just react in a certain way to these types of engagements online, because it does feel genuinely like a lot of the atheist community has like a very bad approach with anyone in the atheist community that disagrees, for example, on the definition of atheism or other things like the mental illness thing, right? So yeah.
I think it's about being aware of what triggers you as well. Like, I know the mental illness thing triggers me because I'm so passionate about this it frustrates me not just about atheism, but just about stigmatizing mental illness anyway frustrates me. So when I see these things, I get angry. It's not just me not enjoying the argument like it is with some other atheist arguments where I'm like not fussed, but I just don't enjoy it. I get angry that people are using these arguments. It's the same thing with when people talk about IQ or like intelligence and oh yeah, religious people are stupid. It's like, why are you putting a value judgment on that? Like, there are people who are less intelligent than other people. Those people need more help, not to be belittled and made to seem like they're less than. That is the fundamental kind of foundation of the eugenics movement, right? And there's no way, like I've said this multiple times, and then every single time someone comes back and says, "Well, eugenics isn't fundamentally bad." No, but every time we've tried it, which is like not that many because it's been in the past like 100 years or whatever, it's had a really bad result, really bad, like some of the worst atrocities in human history result. So no, I don't think eugenics is a good idea. We shouldn't even be talking about it or thinking about it unless we can come up with some miraculous ethical way of doing it, which I don't see. Because in order to do that, you have to place arbitrary value judgments on people's
on what somebody's worth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole point of eugenics is that you're putting value judgments on people, and the value judgments are not led by science or anything like that. They're led by powerful people who value things that relate to them, and that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah. Sorry.
I've got one other thing to say about atheists who
different,
say
right?
that religion is a mental illness.
Yes.
Sort of related to this. But if they're telling people that just because they believe in God, they're delusional and they're suffering from a mental illness, and that drives one of them to go see the doctor or see a psychologist or a psychiatrist and say, "Look, I've been told I'm mentally ill." And the doctor turns around and says, "There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with this belief." If they develop a mental illness later, they're going to be less likely to actually go get seen for what they're going through.
That's true.
Yeah, I think I think this is true, though I don't think that it's like really likely that a person that hears this will go check themselves.
No, but it's a kind of harm that they could cause.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it also makes even if you don't go and check yourself, right? It makes it seem that it's not like a big
mental illness isn't harmful.
Yeah, it's not a thing, right, that you should worry about, because like apparently religion is also a mental, like believing in God is also mental illness. So it's like you should be you should be careful about
it's causing actual harm.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think like ultimately the best thing that you can do, and I think this is true for in general, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're talking about religion or anything else. I think the best thing that we should try to cultivate, even as a society at large, is sort of like a specific attitude towards, like how to approach, disconforming beliefs or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And to approach them with curiosity, I guess, and interest, and trying your best to understand and have meaningful conversations around these things. I think that's the best type of approach to have. And if you have that, then to some extent, I don't really care that much. Like it depends on what you believe, of course, but I don't really care in general that much what you end up believing, because your sort of method of going on about inquiring is a good one, I think. And you're gonna it's gonna be way easier to sort of bring you over and convince you of true things and leave sort of echo chambers and tribalism behind. So I think that is what should be cultivated more than anything, because to some extent it's not a problem if an atheist believes that religion is a mental illness. It's a problem if they believe it by shouting and screaming and coming into it and shouting every theist down and not being able to have conversations about it, because then they don't even have the opportunity to change their mind, right? So I think if they had the better approach, what I think is the better approach, right? Then they may be wrong, but it's more likely that they're going to be less wrong in the future because they have this sort of more open approach.
Yeah.
And they'll actually be willing to listen to what somebody else has to say if they're not being shouted at. Do you watch Handmaid's Tale?
Yes.
I haven't yet.
You know the shame circle, Luke?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of how a lot of atheists make me feel.
Yes, that's yeah, that's so
a
accurate.
religious person in the middle and all the atheists yelling shame, 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 shame. That's not really going to convince the person in the middle of the shame circle to question their beliefs. It's just going to make them lock up.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheshire's asked a question. I'm going to read it out as she wrote it. Atheist fundamentalist evangelicals.
I sort of think there are some.
I agree. I think, I mean, I made a joke on Twitter a while ago that I like to repeat because I find it quite funny that an evangelical atheist is an atheist with arguments so bad they turn people Christian.
Yeah.
but I do think, a lot of some people, a lot of online atheist behavior from specific atheists is that I'm trying to convert people or deconvert people, trying to persuade people. But like the way that I find it really stupid, like, people like Scientologists and Christians are probably the best at this historically about converting. It wasn't about belittling or like degrading. I mean, there was a little bit of colonialism. I'll admit that part was aggressive, but they adopted elements of the other people's societies in order to make that transition easier, right? Like that's why Christianity has lasted so long, historically speaking, right? And I'm not saying that we need to. I don't agree that atheism needs to be something that thinks about conversion at all. But if they were to do that, to want to do that, hatred is not going to be the thing that works for that. Making someone feel stupid is not going to be the thing that works for that. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't work that way. Like even Mormons and stuff, they're not aggressive. They're nice. They want to invite you along to their thing. They compliment you. They make you feel good about yourself. They make you feel like you're part of their group, even though you have very differing beliefs and stuff. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. They're not horrible when they knock at your door. They don't say you're stupid because you don't believe in God or anything like that. So it's just not the right way of going about it.
I mean, I can only speak for myself here, but I know that if somebody was to come up to me and behave like the atheist does online, or not all atheists, but like many atheists do, and start ridiculing me for not believing what they're believing, I'm more likely to punch them in the face than listen to them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people, and I think I disagree slightly with Luke in the sense that I do think that, like, I don't mind people trying to change other people's minds. I don't mind that at all, especially if they think that something is true. I think that's perfectly fine.
I don't mind that.
For you to try.
Sorry. Can I clarify what I mean?
So
I don't mind
clarify,
that.
please.
I don't mind people trying to change other people's minds on what's true or use logical arguments and stuff. I don't like people trying to convert people for like political reasons. Like I think there's a nuance. There's a very slight difference between the two, because like these are people who have bad arguments, who are just trying to convert people because they're like they hate religion and they want more atheists on their side. Whereas someone like yourself, you try and change people's mind because you want people to rationalize better and reason better. Yeah, and there's a big difference for me in the difference between that. I don't like evangelizing.
Yeah,
and I don't like that from Christians either. I find that frustrating.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Though I think that, like, for example, especially in the United States, right, like there is merit to the idea that you should have more atheists that are open about it and like generally have more atheists in bigger numbers, right? Because there tends to be like a very ugly sort of scenery in the United States when it comes to people that do not believe in a God or stuff like that, where there are a lot of social issues that are, sort of bundled in together there. and sort of beliefs tied around morality as well. And so I think it is understandable that people want to have more people that identify as atheists, to show that, you know, atheists it's perfectly fine to be an atheist, and
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing. And to that extent, I agree. I think that we all here live in scenarios where it seems sort of absurd to think, and it seems absurd to me that, you know, you get taught creationism in schools and stuff like that. But that's a very real thing, you know, in the United States. So I think we live in a bit of a different context. Though I, in general, agree with you, Luke, on the idea that, you know, for political reasons, it's not really a good thing. I wanted to actually answer the question from Chesh on what open-minded actually means,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think like a lot of atheists have this quote, and I searched it up because I wanted to, like, from Carl Sagan, right? He says something like, you know, it pays to keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out, right? That's the quote, and they keep saying this all over the place all the time, right? But I do think, and this I haven't thought about this very much, so I might be wrong on this, but I do think that having an open mind is a good thing. But because I do have a different conception of what being open-minded means, right? Like, because what he seems to think here with the quote is that, you know, that if you have an open mind or too much of an open mind, then you start believing everything, right? No matter what, without sort of criticizing it or stuff like that. But to me, being open-minded is more about, you know, sort of what you're willing to look into, and sort of like just, you know, sort of observe without you know, having a knee-jerk reaction to it, right? Like, that's what open-minded means to me, right? At least trying to consider things, you know, by being very aware of your biases and going into it, and trying to sort of analyze it dispassionately to some extent, right? And then you can still end up not believing in it, right? That's perfectly fine. And I think you're going to be actually probably more likely to not believe in it for good reasons if you do this, rather than, you know, just emotionally react to everything and be like, oh no, this is crazy, or stuff like that. So that's how I view open-mindedness, you know, the willingness to sort of analyze these beliefs. But that doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't follow that if I'm willing to analyze these beliefs and give them sort of a lot of attention, that it therefore follows that I should then accept all of these things, right? I don't think it follows at all. So
I agree.
That's
with
how
that.
I see
I agree
the
with
open-mindedness.
That's why I think
thing.
it's important if you're saying a belief is not true, or you don't agree with the belief, you know, whether it's Christianity or anything else. In order for you to say that with conviction, you need to be able to say what their response to you would be. Really, you know, I tend to stick to Abrahamic religions because I know them relatively well. But, like, you know, Hinduism and stuff like that, I don't know very well. But I feel like I know a reasonable amount, enough to say, like, I probably won't. But the Abrahamic religions, absolutely, you know, like, I have enough reason not to believe gods exist from understanding their religions alone, if that makes sense. And I could, I think, effectively still man a Christian, quite easily, depending on the denomination. There's some denominations I'd struggle with, I think. But most denominations, I think I'd be able to still man quite easily. So, and I don't think a lot of atheists would be able to. Even atheists that have been Christian in the past, I think, because they are clouded by their rhetoric,
attachment to the
and they're anti it, so they want to they almost like want to persuade themselves that it's silly to believe in God, so they don't feel like that. It almost goes back to that doubt thing that we were talking about, that guy on YouTube that was like responding to Joe. You know, it's like they don't want to entertain the idea that Christianity has the potential to be rational, because if they do that, then they'll doubt their atheism. And
that was crazy to me.
You know, like, maybe that's it. Maybe that's why they don't want to do it, because they're like, oh, what if I doubt the fact that I'm an atheist?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely easier, right? Like, it's definitely easier to just dismiss it as you know. You don't have to think about it if you just say that it's I don't know, a mental illness, for example, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a tendency for every human to do these types of things, right?
But not critical thinking skeptics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently not, right? I mean, that they tell me that they don't do this, but I keep finding examples of people that seem to do these things.
Chess asked a question that I wanna say because I think it's really funny, but it's not an actual. I think it's rhetorical. How do you deconvert
Okay.
someone from a mental illness?
And it's true.
Yeah, if you think it's a mental illness, why would you bother trying to deconvert someone? Get them treatment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you should give them treatment. Yeah,
Them
maybe they think of themselves as doctors at this point.
I think a
trying
lot
to-
do, because they're a science communicator, they must know science.
Yeah.
Or a science enthusiast, they must know science.
Yeah, but then I think a lot of them, just have this bad experience with religion where they really did have like bad reasons to accept religion, and they were brought up and a lot of their community had bad reasons to believe what they believed. And then they just go out of it and then assume that they know the answers for every Christian out there under the sun, right? Like that's why all of them believe, and I know that somehow, and I know why that is wrong, and that's why they are sort of delusional or stuff like that. But I think that happens, like for example, it happens to me as well, I think, to some extent, right? Because I, for example, used to believe that the lack of belief definition was the better definition. I defended it for a long while now, and for a long while, and then I stopped thinking about atheism that way. And I think that it's much better now, but I still tend to think that many people think like I did at the time, right? So at the beginning, I had this tendency to correct right others of the mistakes that I sort of projected onto them that I was making at the time, whereas thinking that the lack of belief definition was correct. And I think this is a normal tendency, right? Because you view essentially the whole argument then as an argument against your past self, right? Where you know where you went wrong, and then you argue against your past self, even though that's a completely different person and might accept things for different reasons, right? Now, I tend to think now that it is likely that a lot of the people that I interacted with do think that the definition that I used to prefer is better for the reasons that I thought the definition was better. But that's not surprising, because a lot of the reasons that I got and that they presumably get is from atheist influences, right? That share this, and that's because it's in the common knowledge, right? But I still think that it's a wrong sort of attitude to have, or at least something to be mindful of. That just because you don't think of something anymore, it doesn't mean that you know the reasons of everyone that still thinks that. And
I think
should be careful.
Yeah, I think that comes from, though, like those the influences that you're talking about being so certain and so persuasive.
Oh yeah.
And so convincing that and so prevalent. Like they're everywhere. Literally, these arguments are everywhere. It took me before I found you guys, I'd never even heard of the difference, or the kind of, that there was a definitional kind of issue. I'd never heard of that before. And I think that shows you how kind of entrenched into online atheist culture it is, and how people are getting their information from online. They're getting their information from YouTube a lot. It's everywhere, and it takes like, what do we have, like three, like I think 400 subscribers between us, probably less than that, because
We're almost at 400 now.
You're almost at 400, okay.
Yeah.
But it's probably
so
like around...
we're about 500.
Yeah.
Between the two of us.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of shared, I think, probably. So let's say 450. And they have thousands in different continents, different countries, so it's really tough, because it's kind of like, I totally see why you had those thoughts, Philip, and I had the same things. When I first started uni, I was listening to Angry Atheist. He was an angry atheist,
the amazing atheist.
Yeah, and like, some quite right-wing atheist people, and they did influence the way I thought about things. And now I'm like, what the hell? Why did I watch these people? I have clearer thoughts now, and I watch them and go, you're absolutely ridiculous. Like, they have some ridiculous thoughts that are completely not grounded in reality at all. Like, not just about atheism, but about their social stances, right? And it just frustrates me, like, that it's so prevalent, and I think that the it's becoming more left wing now, so there's less of those kind of conservative atheists, which is a good thing for me. But I do think that it's still kind of like there's still that kind of like our route is the only route. This is what it is. They make very good, clear arguments for it, even though when you know a bit more, you can pick holes in them. They seem sound. They seem clear. They will be effective against most religious people because most religious people don't have a clue about atheism either. You know, so
Yeah.
it's really just kind of like but it also breeds this kind of like value judgment, this kind of like false sense of kind of like superiority. You know, it feeds that a lot, I think, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, it does.
And I think Cheshire's right. Cheshire's saying that, you know, online people, there's a culture online about people being afraid to be wrong and afraid to doubt or question their own position.
Yeah.
And one of the things about online atheism is there's a big thing about winning arguments, and the
Yeah.
more arguments you win, the bigger you are
Yeah.
in the atheist community and the better you're seen. And I think a lot of them that are coming into this sort of atheist community have recently lost an identity. So they're sort of trying to refill that identity, and they want to get in with the thing that least resembles what the identity they held before. So they tend to be swayed, like you said, Luke, by the numbers and the confidence and the fact that it is so opposite to what they were before, and rebuild their identity on those.
And I think
Yeah.
it's easy. They make it very easy because it's all in place. All the ideas are already there for you. You don't have to do any thinking. That's Christianity, and this is atheism. Here are all the ideas. It's nicely wrapped and packaged for you. And if that's presented to you and it seems to make sense, which it does seem to make sense, then you don't really have to think about much else. You can just say, I don't have a burden of proof. It's on you.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, people enjoy looking at people fighting, right?
That's
like
true.
in general.
Yeah,
and
they do
that's
enjoy it as
that's
well.
That's
true.
why we have the MMA.
Yeah, that's true in real life. Like that's true for physical sort of fighting, and it's true for sort of like intellectual quote unquote fighting, right? And that's
No. Philip, stop. Can't hear you. Going to be right back. Oh my.
Throw your uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react. You whisper in my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back.
Good. It's good. There we go. We're back.
yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying, Philip?
No, just nothing. Something about, I guess, the atheist experience being like a show that is, at least it seems to me right now, just dedicated to, almost like an arena where atheists can enjoy other atheists dunking on theists, right? Rather than
Right.
having conversations, right? Like that's what it seems to be. To me at least, right? Because it's not even about, because like, you can look, I think, at the atheist experience, and if you're sort of trying to be like as neutral as you can, and I know that it's hard, I do think that there's a good case to be made that a lot of the time people on the atheist side actually do not make that good of arguments, right? Like I think they make pretty poor arguments sometimes even poorer than the caller, right? But there's still sort of this atmosphere that, yeah, right, you are, you're right, and I can hang up on you and stuff like that. And I remember thinking sometimes while watching the atheist experience, still like a while back, and still being convinced of all the things that are sort of related to that. I was like feeling this disconnect, right? Where you're sort of like, yeah, but he didn't really make a good point, right? But then, you know, the atmosphere seems such that, you know, oh yeah, but he was a theist and
Slam
he was
dunk.
like, yeah, there was a dunking or
because
some
you didn't
sort, and
let him
then you sort
speak.
of dismiss
that,
that, right? You
yeah.
think, yeah, you sort of go along, and it's like, yeah, I mean, but I guess he had a good point after all, right? Like he clarified it after he hung up then, and yeah, and it's I don't know, I don't like that sort of atmosphere, though I get why it exists, and I don't think it necessarily has to be a bad thing. I just think that
Yeah, this is a really good opportunity for me to plug actually Thursday's stream with Answers and Reasons, because Brina has some amazing points around the power dynamics of call-in shows and how that works and how it makes somebody appear to maybe have a better argument than they do because they have power in that situation, rather than it being because their argument is better and they can just mute the calls and they can just hang up whenever they want and then just like straw man that individual
and
like,
mute
immediately
people.
after. Yeah. So watch that stream, guys, if you're interested in that kind of the power dynamics within the atheist community, because it's going to be, I think it's going to be really good. Bruno's amazing. I think you're spot on though, Philip, with that. Like, and I think that actually those call-in shows, the people that are calling in, they're not for them. Those people are calling in to have conversations. It should be for them, really. But actually, it's for an external audience who are already doubting. Like, it will only work for people who are already having doubts and who want to reinforce their atheist beliefs. That's it. It won't convert anyone who has strong Christian beliefs already that atheism is any better.
Yeah.
So it
absolutely it won't.
It's very tailored for a specific type of audience.
Yeah, and it's not just for the people who are doubting, it's also for people who are already atheists, arguably. I think that's the biggest audience. That's what the show is made for, right? Other atheists being like, yeah, look at the dumb theist, right? He got one over his head again, right? So it's just, yeah. I don't know.
When I see shows like that, I generally see the Futurama meme, shut up and take my money. Because that's who they're playing for, the audience that'll give them money to keep doing it. They're like the gladiator in the arena or the lion in the arena that the Christians are being thrown to.
Yeah.
They want to keep that arena going.
Yeah. And Chesh brings up the line as well. And the line is very similar, but it's not non-for-profit. So arguably it has a potential to be worse, you know, because it's just there to make money. It's pure entertainment. It's not there for like any kind of activism reasons like the ACA is. So
I've never watched it.
So it's basically the atheist experience by Jimmy Snow. That's all you need to know, really. That's all it is.
I really don't like Jimmy Snow, so
yeah. So it's not that different. The only main difference is that it's private. It's private in the sense of like it's money making. It's not it has no responsibility to activism. So obviously they can make it more dramatic, more entertaining, and make more money that way. So yeah, not a fan. Could you say that the atheist experience, by their definition, is indoctrination?
That's a very good question.
Or by my definition, I guess.
Yeah, that's another.
Because I said indoctrination is going to somewhere and saying you shouldn't. But I don't know, because I think that, and I'm just going to talk about Matt Dillahunty. I'm not his biggest fan, but I think he does share insights from the Bible. He does encourage people to go read the Bible. He thinks that will probably make people more atheist. So I don't know, because I feel like they do get people to look in it, but maybe it's a lens that they're getting people to look into other things through. That's the issue. You get people to look in from like a superior lens where they're kind of like being like, look how silly these thoughts are, rather than being like, here are the thoughts, make your own judgment up.
Yeah, like what is their definition of indoctrination? What do you think that they would see as indoctrination?
I think they see it. Sorry, go on, Dave.
I was just going to say the line I normally hear from a lot of atheists is teaching people what to think, not how to think.
What to think not how to think.
How to
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I mean, but that by that definition seems pretty clear to me that the atheist experience is indoctrinating.
Is
people, right?
indoctrination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that they would argue, I'm not saying this is right because I don't agree with this, they would argue that it's not indoctrination because it's not a religious belief.
Yeah, but that doesn't first of all, that's arbitrary if you're excluding that it's not in the definition. It seems to be special pleading at that point.
I might be straw manning, but I feel like that would be a response that we'd get if we said, why is that atheist experience not indoctrination? I think that people would say because it's not religious.
Yeah, but then I mean, if you think that is the definition, then by that measure, pretty much schools are also indoctrinating people, right? Because they teach you what to think to some extent, at least they do, right?
At least until college.
Yeah. But even in college, right? They'll teach you sort of what to think in the sense of the contents of what you should believe, right? Sometimes, actually, very often, right? I would argue. So it's not. They probably teach you also how to think to some extent, although I think that part is unfortunately not as developed as it should be, both in schools and in universities and in life in general. That's why I think we need more philosophy. But I think by that definition, pretty much a ton of things is going to be fall under indoctrination.
Who wants to do a test tweet then about asking atheists what they think indoctrination is?
That would be a good,
and why something like the atheist experience isn't indoctrination.
No, I don't think it should be joined together though, right? Because if you do that, then there's going to start to think of ways to not think of
separate them.
Yeah, to separate them, right? So I think you should just ask what the definition of indoctrination is, and then make the other point afterwards if there is a point to be made. I don't know what my definition of indoctrination would be, though. I'm confused about what I think if the atheist experience is indoctrination or not.
I don't think it is indoctrination because
I think I agree with you.
Because I don't think it's entrenched enough in someone's life to be indoctrination.
Yeah,
I think Icarus says it's propaganda. I think that it could be propaganda. Yeah, I think propaganda is probably more accurate.
Seems to be pretty close. Yeah, but that
it's
doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad, right? Propaganda is not really.
Well, I'll agree with you there because propaganda is quite often misused today. If you go back to, what's his name, Bayers?
It's just persuasive
Edward
media,
Bayers.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's just media that tries to convince you of taking a certain position rather than teaching you something bad.
Yeah. Well, the only reason it's
Bernays. Sorry, Bernays, the original writer of the Manual of Propaganda.
Yeah, the only reason people think it's bad is because of the Nazis and communist Russia. But we had propaganda campaigns and China, yeah. But we had propaganda. It's propaganda to make propaganda seem like something the communists do.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
So, do one of you guys want to make that tweet? I'll leave that up to you. An action from this meeting, this very official meeting.
I can do. I'm not sure how many of those kind of atheists.
That's my worry as well, right? Maybe of the three of us, maybe Luke is going to be the one that is going to be able to reach that audience.
Okay,
I'll
do it.
I think
I'm not responding to any of the answers. You guys can be the responders to the answers. Okay, I'm not responding to.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to necessarily respond. I would just be very curious to see what the responses are in general.
Okay, I'll do it. Is take the vaccine people propaganda? Yes.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, it's propaganda.
Yeah, but then a lot of people just go, yeah, it's propaganda, and then as if that was the argument, right? That's where the argument ends.
Yeah, but
it doesn't end there.
This is again usage, isn't it? It's again usage. We all come back to usage. Propaganda is just persuasive political arguments or media.
Mm.
I think AXP is more like
the colloquial and the political science definition.
Rev says, I think atheist experience is more like what American Idol is to music. Is all propaganda bad? No.
No, I don't think so.
No. I mean, convincing people to take the vaccines is propaganda, but it's very useful propaganda.
Yeah, I'd say so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think when it's like clearly lies and it's clearly targeted at a minority group, like like the like the freedom of movement stuff that Priti Patel's done, I think that's bad propaganda because it's dehumanizing a group of people in order to get political support, which is not right. But it's bad propaganda because it's immoral, rather than it being bad propaganda because it's not effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to have like a bad connotation to propaganda because it effectively is a collection of techniques that are like sort of a bit shady, to be honest, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
That would be a good stream
they-
for Answers in Reason, don't you think? The morality of propaganda.
Yeah, that would be a good topic, I think, because it is like it tends to use certain techniques that are like not exact like yeah, that could be questionable from a moral perspective, right? It's not just here's why I think this is right, and here's why I think you should think this is right too.
Yeah.
It doesn't go only that far, right? It has certain underpinnings that are not yeah.
Yeah, there's
Right.
psychological
There's-
elements that
yeah.
are used to reach the crowd and
Yeah.
convince the crowd.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
Is spreading, because there's two ways of doing this, isn't it? Well, there's multiple ways, but there's like two situations where spreading an ethical message unethically, is that moral? Or
that's a
is
good question.
spreading an unethical message ethically, is that moral? Like, those breaking it down
I'd
like that
say
would be really cool.
neither one is moral.
Yeah, I
in
would
my
agree
opinion.
with you. Only ethical messages ethically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or would you say? Oh no, let's
I
get
think I
Answers in
would
Reason.
say
Send
in
this
the
to
first
Joe.
case it could be moral in the first case if the message is really important and it outweighs
a
like getting that
deontologist?
message across outweighs.
Or
Yeah, I'm not a
consequentialist?
deontologist, as you both know. Otherwise, I would be forced to give a different answer.
Does propaganda use the same psychological tricks as advertisement? Yes, it
A lot of
does.
them, yeah.
Yeah.
It does. In fact, I would say that advertisement took a lot of its tools that it now uses today from propaganda techniques in the 50s, and from earlier actually.
Yeah. I would suggest anybody that wants to learn about propaganda pick up Edward Bernay's book
Yeah.
from the 30s called Propaganda. And I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm promoting the Nazis, but I'm not. But if you want to learn a lot about propaganda, learn about how the Nazis used it. And that teaches you a lot about propaganda.
Yeah.
I'm not promoting the message that they
That's
did.
one of the things, though, isn't it? They were very good at propaganda. They had a skill.
They were masters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why they were
Babe,
so effective.
why you're being a Nazi now?
No, this is my stream. This is my stream.
No. I'm very anti-Nazi, but if you want to learn effective propaganda, they were masters. The same with Soviet Russia.
Yeah, they were
like sort of 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Bad people using a tool to do bad things.
Well, they had an effective army as well, so
yeah.
Anyone who wants to learn more, just sign up for the
Patreon.
I don't have a Patreon, so joke's on you, nerdy. I don't get any money for this. I'm poor.
We have a Patreon and we don't get any money either.
Oh wow, we need to do better advertising for our Patreons. We need to do. Well, I don't have one, so there we go. Maybe I should do one. Who knows? Maybe I'll get super chats. I can't even do super chats right now.
You got to get 1,000 subscribers to get.
Oh, is 1,000 the limit?
Yeah,
that's so many. I don't have. I have 100. I have a tenth of that. Anyway,
we've got a third.
You've almost got a half.
Oh yeah, so we do.
Is there any more questions from the chat? If not, I think it's probably. You guys want to tie up, or are we good? I don't know. Like, we're not on topic anymore.
It was a good discussion. Yeah,
we're not on topic.
And I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I just farted.
Wow.
And on this note,
Tension
ladies
breaker.
and gentlemen, let's.
Yeah, I might have to evacuate the room.
You have the window open and all.
Yeah,
I can see you're growing chilies.
yeah.
What type of chilies are
And
they?
they're
I think
very
we've had
good.
this conversation.
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I'd have to ask Emma.
Oh, I've got some chilies.
She
growing
did
too.
grow bird's eye chilies last year, and they were
Really?
amazing.
I always thought Bird's Eye
Yeah.
chilies was the brand.
It's not fish.
I know, but you know what I mean. Like whenever I was like, why do Bird's Eye do chilies?
No, they're just super hot.
Are we going to come on to the non sequitur show to talk about some of this stuff? Will we get paid?
If we're invited.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Like, yeah.
We're happy to do other shows, I think.
I'm happy to pretend like I'm intelligent.
You can't say that when you have a master's
Aren't we
degree.
all? Aren't we all, Dave?
Captain Chili. Cool. Yeah, I think it's a good time to wrap it up. We've been talking for 2 hours. I'm quite tired actually,
Yeah.
and I want to play Skyrim. I've just gone back into Skyrim, so that's a hole for
Yeah. I want to keep watching Hellbound because it's kind of addictive.
me. So just before we go, what are the streams for next week, Dave?
On Tuesday, we're doing a sort of philosophical review of The Truman Show. And on Thursday, we're talking to Brina about power dynamics and YouTube creators. And hopefully the week after, the Epicurean view of death.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be pretty
And
cool.
what was the other one that was suggested?
The Raven's paradox.
The
I
Raven
think,
paradox,
which-
yes.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Which is sort of like a philosophy of language, logic paradox.
Yeah, it's epistemology.
It's a bit, yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird one. It's gonna be interesting. I'm excited for all of them,
Cool.
actually.
Cool.
Yeah.
Which ones are you joining, Philip?
I like, as always, I always have the plan to join all of them, but then things can get in the way, and I then sometimes I'm not able to join all of them. But I definitely will try to be there with Brina. I'm really excited for that one, and yeah, the rest of them too.
There might be 5 of us for Brina then. That's unusual.
Yes.
We could though.
Yeah.
We can.
Well,
Grill,
you said you were available next Thursday. That's why we were doing it Thursday.
Yeah, I am. I'll be there definitely. Yeah, I've already
better be there.
cleared it with the missus.
Nice. I can relate to
that. Excellent. Okay, cool. And I guess just to wrap this up in terms of like going back to the conversation point of what we were talking about, I hope you can now see, if you didn't already, that religion is not a mental illness.
Yeah, and I have loads of dodgy contacts, and if you don't stop, I'll track you down and send some people around your house.
Funny thing is, he does actually have
I mean-
dodgy contacts. That's why he wears glasses.
That
That was such a bad joke.
Eh.
And that's where we're going to end on that joke. So thank you. This has been Bearded Heretics' 3rd stream ever. I'm Bearded Heretic Luke.
And I'm the fat guy, Dave.
Okay, so we're doing the joke
Yeah,
thing.
we'll
So
do the
yeah,
joke
okay,
thing.
and I'm Philip.
See you later, guys.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Good night.
Throw your uppercut, try to hit me in the gut, thinking that I won't react.